us. My name is Rabbi Zac Kamenetz, and I am the founder and CEO of Shefa, the world's first organization that is dedicated to supporting Jewish people in their psychedelic explorations. Before we begin, I just want to make a note. We have a program change. One of our friends and co-panelists, our colleague Sugra Ahmed, had a loss in her family early this morning and will not be able to join us this time. So prayers for Sugra, prayers for her family, and we hope to hear from her or see her another panel. Just a quick housekeeping note, run of show. So this morning I'll give a brief introduction. We'll hear from our fantastic panelists, make those introductions, and then we will have time for a very deep Q&A. So if there are questions that you're already coming with, or there are questions that arise and emerge from the conversation, the speaking that's happening, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Program manager Chloe will be collecting and curating those questions. We can have a very rich conversation toward the end of our program. And we're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for joining us. My participation in the religious professional study at Johns Hopkins was in 2017, and through my direct experiences Johns Hopkins with psilocybin, I founded Shefa in response to an overwhelming response from the Jewish community, just me speaking about my two experiences in a controlled research environment with psilocybin created an intense amount of feedback. People were waiting to have the conversation in the Jewish community with a rabbi, and built a container with many more people to hold those experiences, beginning with integration and then to preparation, helping people braid their Jewish rituals, their Jewish traditions, their ancestry with their direct psychedelic experiences. We have grown since then, offering small group ketamine in the Bay Area, also moving to legal environments for small group psilocybin work. But it's very clear to me that since 2017 and beyond to 2025, conversation in my community is old and deep. And it's also clear from my colleagues who are here today and many more that there are religious and spiritual communities, particularly in monotheistic traditions, that are looking for ways to continue the conversation about good psychedelic work done well to further spiritual commitments, religious life, the way in which we interact in a good way with our neighbors, our colleagues, the rest of the world, the planet itself. And this is an effort to that conversation in a little bit more of a public way. So today's program is part of a series highlighting participants in the Johns Hopkins and NYU psilocybin study with religious leaders. This landmark study, conducted between 2016 and 2017, brought together about 25 clergy from across many traditions. One of the purposes was to see how psilocybin in a supportive setting might impact the spiritual lives of those whose vocation is already centered on the sacred, and how those experiences might affect those spiritual leaders, those religious professionals, and their work with their congregations and their communities. And the findings were striking. Most participants reported profound mystical or transcendent experiences. Many described a deepened sense of God's connection to them, an expanded appreciation for their own work and other faith traditions, and renewed clarity in their pastoral work. For a majority, these effects endured months and even years after those sessions, influencing their prayer lives, their preaching, and the way they accompany others throughout their lives, as Jaime likes to say, from cradle to grave. Coverage in the New York Times, NPR, and the New Yorker, other outlets emphasized how groundbreaking this work has been. But what has been missing, at least for me and my other colleagues, the unfiltered voices of the clergy themselves, their direct experiences and the impacts on their lives, good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what this series is about. Today, you'll hear directly from participants, what they experienced, what it meant in their lives, and how it continues to shape their ministry, their service, their spiritual connections. We invite you to listen with openness and respect as we move from research findings to lived testimony, the human heart of the study. Thank you again for being here. And with that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Reverend Dr. Jaime Clark-Soles.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Afternoon in some places. So I'm in Dallas. It is so good to be here, and special thanks to Zach for the invitation and setting this series up, and to Chloe for doing all the logistics on this. It really is a wonderful offering. I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A. So let me just start for a second answering the question of how a mostly nice ordained Baptist minister, New Testament Bible scholar, seminary professor, grandmother of two, soon to be three, ended up here today anyway, talking to you about psychedelics and spiritual experience. So in seminary, I served in the chaplains department of Connecticut Hospice, which was America's first architecturally intentional hospice. It had a really profound effect on me to be in my early 20s, journeying with people and their families through the dying process. It really was nothing less than holy ground, sometimes smelly and loud and heartbreaking, and other times awe-inspiring and tender and even peaceful, but it was always holy ground. I was especially intrigued by how the people and their families made sense of, or not, integrated or not, the experiences they were having into their own spiritual lives. And honestly, I was struck and surprised by the variety I saw, even from folks in the same religious tradition. So I went on to get a PhD in biblical studies and become a professor at Perkins School of Theology, who regularly teaches a class called Evil, Suffering, Death, and Afterlife. I know, a very light topic. I also specialize in the Gospel of John specifically, which is nothing if not mystical. So I am a scholar, always interested, of course, in the advancement of human knowledge, but I am also a seminary professor training spiritual leaders to soul journey with people, as Zach said, from cradle to grave, in the being born, in the living, and the dying, and all the in-between spaces where those things overlap. So I'm an ordained Baptist minister, and I am captivated by matters of spiritual formation and the soul. So when I learned about this FDA-approved clinical trial at Hopkins, for me, it brought together very naturally my academic and ministerial interests. So like most participants in this study, I do count these sessions among the top 5 spiritually significant experiences of my life. Now, a lot happened in those 2 day-long sessions, and I'm guessing I'm probably not the only one on the call who has had psychedelic experience. And so, there's a fine line between sharing enough to build connection as opposed to boring the other person with every detail of your personal 7-hour journey. I will say that I had vivid, fully embodied, mystical encounter with God. I experienced a broad range of emotions, from love to joy and laughter to glorious awe, speechless reverence, pure gratitude, all the way to grief I didn't even know I had. So really a whole range. In one part of the journey, precious jewels are a pretty customary part of a psychedelic journey. And so at one point there was this antique, heavy, dark door, and the people in my life were showing up as precious jewels being placed on this door. Well, this was all really beautiful, and it was incredibly moving until I saw one particular person show up as a gem moving towards the door. And this person was someone who had really caused real harm. And I didn't want them on my door, and I didn't want them anywhere near my people. So I will have to say, at that point, God and I had a very serious come to Jesus meeting about the topic of forgiveness, real forgiveness, and who counts as a gem in God's eyes. And here's a spoiler alert, it's everybody, versus my own. It definitely involved some resistance and a lot of curse words on my part. It also involved a process over time after the session. I started therapy as one response to God's invitation to grow in this area and in other areas. And I will say, I mean, I'm a Christian. I understand, forgiveness. I had intellectually and checked the box of, yes, I forgive this person, but I'm talking about forgiveness is like deep down at the very core of who you are, which turns out to be a bit of a different ballgame. Probably not surprisingly for a biblical scholar, I experienced and understood my scriptures in surprisingly new ways. And I do write about this and talk about this at length, and I'm very happy to go into detail in the Q&A. Really, just in a way, I described it sometimes as, instead of about just understanding my scriptures from the outside in, I had a number of experiences of experiencing them from the inside out. This is true for a lot of different things like the Transfiguration. Christianity is loaded, of course, with mystical experiences from Genesis to Revelation. Scripture recounts mystical experiences, and not only that, but actual induction techniques for making it more likely to have such experiences. So in one point, for instance, if you know John 14, it says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions, rooms, abiding places, depending on how you want to translate it. But this one point, I was in this bright, brilliant, crystalline structure that was, very John 14. I was thinking of that. And I was in this central atrium, and I was just looking up, and people I love were showing up and just being bathed in light and love. And again, it was very moving. And then out of nowhere appeared a really important mentor for me, somebody who was very dear spiritual mentor. And I hadn't seen or talked to him for quite a while. And I thought, all right, this is very random. But hey, it's good to see you here. And moved on. When I got to my hotel later that evening, I learned that he had died that day, that he had become what my tradition calls part of the communion of saints, or the great cloud of witnesses. So that also, I think, is something, that I found profoundly meaningful and is something to ponder metaphysically. Anyway, 8 years later, I am still learning and integrating these psychedelic experiences, because I was in the study in the fall of 2017. So I want to move to this. So when it comes to me, especially reading scripture, the most important part of this conversation around psychedelic journeys has to do with the so what question. So, of course, Houston Smith famously said, a religious experience does not constitute a religious life, right? So the idea there is it's nothing but an invitation, right? In the end, the question must always be, what are the effects in our lives of such experiences? Do they lead to wisdom, insight, and virtues like compassion, humility, justice, service? So the Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament and had many mystical experiences of his own, said this. I love this quote for this context. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and mature. By which he means answering the call to become a deeper person who lives in right relationship to self, to God, and really to the whole cosmos. Paul then goes on to speak of what he calls fruit of the Spirit, and he lists 9 different virtues, starting out with love, I think not surprisingly. Certainly, my psychedelic experiences have had not only direct and enduring personal effects, as I've just described to some degree, but also direct and enduring vocational effects. So I now work as a bridge figure in this rapidly developing terrain at the intersection of psychedelics, spiritual experience, and spiritual care. And I'm going to list a few ways I do that, and I'm very happy if anyone's interested to expand on it. And I do it not to just be like, look at me, I'm doing this and that, but to help you also consider your own place in the conversation and be aware of the kinds of conversations that are going on. So obviously I'm a seminary professor. So within my role as an ordained seminary professor, right, I'm teaching my students about this topic. I also am supporting Christians who are either preparing to or have already had psychedelic journeys, and educating the wider church. So those are some of my roles, especially Christians who are interested or have had experiences with journeys, particularly set in a Christian container. So the book I'm writing for the wider church, it's really kind of a primer. It's called Psychedelics and Soul Care, What Christians Need to Know. And it'll be done by December and coming out with Erdman's. So please look for that book. Second, I'm a field scholar for the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. Please check it out. To me, in my experience, this is the leader at the intersection of medical therapeutic and the spiritual. Ancient sources all agree that Jesus of Nazareth was nothing if not a healer. Third, I'm working with a team that includes scholars, therapists, and Christian practitioners to help therapists gain cultural competency around specific religious traditions to better serve their clients as holistic individuals. Currently, medical doctors and therapists are not routinely trained around religion and spirituality. And as we all know, as whole people, those things mixed together, not just our medical diagnoses, but we're whole people. So it's important to kind of create resources for therapists to better serve them. Fourth, I'm working on something called the Pulse Initiative at Harvard Law School, which stands for Psychedelic Use, Law, and Spiritual Experience. So here I'm collaborating with other people for wider legal access to psychedelics for healing and growth of the body, mind, and soul. And that takes a number of different directions and trajectories that we could talk about. And then finally, the Transforming Chaplaincy, Psychedelic Chaplaincy Network. I'm part of that, helping to set best practices and accreditation for psychedelic chaplaincy. And I could talk more about that. But for this part, let me just wrap up by saying whether we're talking about personal integration or serving the world, to me, community and collaboration are key. So I am especially gratified for an event like this and for the number of people here today. I'm really excited how many people showed up. I'm really looking forward to even more connection and hearing what questions or insights people have. So I'm excited to join all of you in working toward the flourishing of all who inhabit this beautiful and complicated world, this world that God so loves, so that it may indeed be on earth as it is in heaven, in the words of Jesus. Thank you.
Amen. And thank you so much, Jaime. Just as a reminder, if there are questions that our viewers or audience has for Jaime directly, her work, her experience, please feel free to put them into the chat, or any questions that are coming up for you around the bridging, the braiding of psychedelics and religious traditions. We're looking forward to that Q&A. Thank you again. And now we will hear from our second panelist, Reverend Dr. Seth Jones.
Thank you, Zach. And it's great to be here and great to hear from Jaime and to be among my colleagues from the, I like to call it the experiment, the clergy experiment. And I'm not going to be as organized as Jaime and all her academic brilliance. But I wanted to begin a little bit with my background as well. To begin with, I went through the clergy study in December of 2018 and January of 2019, and I found out about it. I was a pastor at the time in Maine, and one of my clergy friends sent me a notice that he saw on Facebook, and so I applied the next day and managed to get myself into the study after some struggle and cajoling of the leaders of the study, and I finally got in the second part of it. I was one of the last 2 or 3 people to go through it. In my background, just briefly, I was a pastor for 15 years and served church national park and in the coast of Maine. And I have a Master of Arts in Religious Studies degree, and my focus in that was the Gnostics and how they viewed the world and its meanings for today. I also have a Doctor of Ministry degree, and I got that with Leonard Sweet. Some of you may know who he is. He's big in Methodist circles, particularly, but his focus is on semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols. And so I spent my time 3 years studying with him in a cohort as well on semiotics, church, and culture. And the reason I got my doctorate was a direct result of my experience at Johns Hopkins. And the focus of my doctorate was on extraordinary spiritual experiences. And that came about both from my psychedelic experiences, but also as a result of my past as well. I've had various encounters that I would put at the level of extraordinary spiritual experience. And just briefly, in my first experience, I had a little bit something like what Jaime was talking about. And I had a moment where the entire universe sort of popped up into being this shimmering cathedral that I realized had been built on the foundation of beauty, and that beauty itself is the matrix upon which creation exists. And an aspect of that that was very strong is that grief and our relationship to those who have died and our own deaths cannot be separated from beauty and the beautiful. And at no point, neither my first or second experience, would I say I had a direct encounter with God or Jesus. But particularly my first encounter, I would say, had aspects that were spiritual, divine, and in that way, it felt very personal rather than unitive. And we can talk in the question and answers a little bit about some of the concerns about how the study was conducted and the questions that were asked, because parts of it seemed to drive towards a desired outcome, which I did not have. My second experience was chaotic and I would say difficult. I had encounters with different beings. I became different beings, divine beings, and I had an experience of what I would say the multiplicity of the self, and encounters with rage and power and how those are transmitted through our experience. But both experiences at Johns Hopkins sort of pushed me from what often is talked about in theological circles, but in others as well, moving from knowing things to the known. I now knew things from my experience that previously I had known about. And so now I knew them directly. And so there was a long period after my psychedelic experiences at Johns Hopkins that I had a sense of this sort of ontological reality, this in and of itself reality of things beyond the veil, is how I would put it. And and that's that sense of stark reality of influences coming into us from the outside that we can't normally see in this reality. Houston Smith speaks of psychedelics as being like a, I can't remember his exact description, but it's like turning on a fire hose of reality into the brain. And so our brains are sort of restrictors. They close off reality so we can function. And psychedelics breaks apart those restrictions so that we can get a full view. And so I have questions about whether it's an actual reality or if it's just a function of human experience that we're encountering. And we can discuss that more. But one of the things I wanted to bring forward from my second experience in particular is that you know, I think the psychedelic world has become much more conscious in the past year or so of difficult experiences and the issues around some of these experiences that can be quite destabilizing, I think would be the word I would use. And we can't gloss over those. It's not all, rainbows and unicorns and teddy bears sitting on mushrooms, drinking hot chocolate. It's there can be some pretty extreme events. And so my second experience would fall under what I would call an extreme event with regards to a psychedelic experience or an extraordinary spiritual experience. And so just briefly, I wanted to say about my extraordinary spiritual experience work as a doctorate in that subject is when I talk of extraordinary spiritual experiences, I see it as sort of an umbrella that includes psychedelics. It also has mystical properties, encounters with the paranormal, and alternative consciousness. And so there's, psychedelics works within that, assuming you did have an extraordinary spiritual experience when you took psychedelics. Not every psychedelic experience is an extraordinary spiritual experience, nor is every spiritual experience extraordinary. So I just want to be clear about that. But what I came away with after reflecting on my personal experiences, and I don't normally like to do this, this seemed, for a long time, this seemed intellectually unstable and difficult to navigate, is taking personal experiences and expanding them into universals, or vice versa, taking universals and making them personal. It's not always the best intellectual move. However, in this case, I had sort of an insight into the structure of extraordinary spiritual experiences. And it's not a step by step, each one can take place on its own. But part of how an extraordinary spiritual experience is functioning is there's a set and setting, which I take from the psychedelic world. But part of a set and setting is understanding where you are, the history of where you are, and the meanings that are coming to you from the place where the event is occurring. And then there's what's showing up, the appearance aspect of an extraordinary spiritual experience. So the appearance of things or beings or feelings. And then there's the revelation aspect. What are these beings or things or experiences telling you about themselves? What is trying to be made known in the experience? And then finally, there's and then there's the revelation aspect. What is it actually saying to you? So set and setting, appearance, who's showing up, what's being said to you, the revelation, and then finally the disclosure, what we tell other people about what we experience. So meaning making, which I think ultimately this is all about, is only fully developed when it's in communication with others, with groups of people. We can only truly know the meaning of a thing once we've shared it with others and hear back from them what that meaning is. And so that's sort of what my psychedelic experience led me to in terms of things I am participating in. I'm working on my turning my doctorate project into a book, and that's an ongoing experience. I've been participating in these various groups as well, along with Zach's group Shefa here. There's also Ligare, which is Hunt Priests group focused on Christian aspects of the psychedelic world. And my concern with all of this is trying to make space, particularly in sacred worlds. Our as with Jaime, I'm in the Christian tradition, and our tradition struggles making space for extraordinary spiritual experiences, especially in the Protestant world, and which is surprising to me, given that the entire foundation of our faith tradition is built on multiple extraordinary spiritual experiences. I would submit that a great way to read scripture is to read it as moving from one extraordinary spiritual experience to another, and that everything that scripture is doing is finding the meaning of that particular extraordinary experience. So that's what I have for right now. So back to you, Zach.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth, so much for your disclosure to come back to your framework. And actually, just before jumping in, I'm finding myself um, tantalized inside by everything that I'm hearing. And before jumping from one extraordinary experience to another, I might just like take just a few moments for all of us to quietly internalize things that we have heard and encountered from our guests. How much good brain food. And maybe just taking the time to see if, how, and where it is resonating in the rest of our being. The response somewhere in our emotions, the spirit itself, maybe some tighter field around us. Maybe we can't quite understand or pinpoint. But thank you again for taking the time to integrate some of what was shared. We're living this in practice, not only what we experience, the imagery, the words that are being communicated, but how we're actually taking them in. So this is a great opportunity. There are already some questions that are coming into the chat, and I might just turn to Jaime, but also Seth, a question, Jaime, that you raised in your research about how this has impacted your vocation. Um, what do Christians need to know? I know this is like a little bit of a spoiler for your book. And Seth, I want to also have you join and come in here, given that you're creating a framework that might be applied to something beyond Christianity, I think. Um, but both of you in dialogue, at least at the beginnings of the maturation of your work and understanding, what do Christians need to know?
So for me, the four main things. So my tagline for the book is, it's my job to help the church think skillfully, intelligently, right, based on facts. and faithfully and ethically with the conversation about how it does or doesn't intersect with our tradition. And so for me, it's 4 different trajectories. One is the medical therapeutic, because a lot of Christians actually don't even know what is going on in the medical therapeutic world, with the fact our vets are dying by suicide at 22 a day. These medicines are literally saving lives, postpartum depression, you name it. So we could talk about the medical therapeutic. So a lot of Christians actually don't even know about that, even though it's all over the news, et cetera. Then the second piece I want to focus on, what Seth's talking about, is the whole spiritual formation piece. So in other words, we were in this study, we were unusual because most studies being done with psychedelics are on people with specific medical diagnoses, whether it's eating disorders, opioid addiction, right? So what about the use of psychedelics for a soul exploration, for deepening in your own spiritual tradition? So that's, again, Seth said it's already a little bit, sometimes Christians, don't really know what's there in their tradition, and especially Protestants are really scared of the body, and things like saints, and the Catholics and Orthodox are like, yes, saints are a real thing. So there's the medical therapeutic. The second part is the spiritual formation. So what about psychedelics in the context of not a diagnosis, but strictly for spiritual formation purposes? Then the third part the Christians need to know about is the justice issues, right? So white people discovered psychedelics, and then a lot of tough stuff happened with colonialism, just justice issues. Who's in jail right now? Brown people, for using substances that, white people use all the time. Right relationship with indigenous folks, our indigenous siblings, with the earth itself, because of course we're now over harvesting things and grabbing toads and peyote, and so just justice issues all the way around. And then finally, the church, even if everyone's dead set against, like, this is wrong and no Christian should ever be involved in anything with this, the very least, the church needs to participate in harm reduction efforts. So what Seth just said, I mean, people can have very destabilizing experiences, and Christians are not Christians. And the church needs to be informed enough to actually be a resource for helping people, if they're going to prepare for an experience, understand how you do this well and as safely as possible, set and setting, right? Helping people really think through what they're doing, why they're doing it, what is your intention? Or if they've already had an experience that has destabilized them, how do we connect them with the proper resources for working through that?
Yeah. So, Zach, remind me, your question again, just briefly, was
What do Christians need to know, given
yes,
your
correct.
direct experiences, Jamie's work, your
Yeah,
framework, and if you were speaking to a congregation about what folks need to know at
right,
this moment right now, what would you offer?
right. So my take, everything Jamie said, and I think her framework for her book is excellent. But I think what Christians really need to know is, so often the way church is done is it's very, a lot of it's very passive, and there's attempts to sort of make it active through rituals like communion or baptism, but uh, there there are people out there who've had these extraordinary spiritual experiences, and they are looking for places to help them frame meaning for these experiences. Um, I think most people, once they've reflected on their lives for a little while, get to a point where they understand um, that if I just keep reflecting on the things I've done with the things I know, all I know is what I know. I don't know anything beyond that. And it's actually becoming a trap because I can't get out. We need community to help us frame meaning for our lives. And if I can't bring the deepest experience of my life, as Jamie mentioned, and as you mentioned, Zach, the my experience at Johns Hopkins is one of the most influential of my life. And it affected all sorts of ways of being and understanding and thinking. And if I can't bring those experiences to the faith experience, I'm not sure what I'm learning in that context anymore. And so I I know that there's people out there who've had encounters uh, with no experience with church, and they've had an encounter with Jesus or uh, Jesus's mother Mary or God, and they're looking for ways to understand and frame the experience. And so having ways of understanding these experiences from from a perspective where you can actually, as our study showed, where you can actually generate these experiences to help create frameworks for it. It seems like a valuable thing for the church to expose itself to other people's experience. I'm not saying churches have to go out and have a psychedelic experience. I really don't believe that's necessary. But I do think um, in order to really grasp the faith experience, it's important to be aware that we as Christians are participating in the after effects of an extraordinary spiritual experience. That you've either had one yourself or you're participating in the effects of one with others. So I don't know, it's a little abstract. I'd like to see it embodied, as Jaime said. Jaime's done a lot of work on the body and faith. And my second experience at Johns Hopkins made me very aware that the body has its own mind. And what I would say that this comes out of what my limited understanding of Jewish ways of thinking, but matter matters to God, and our bodies matter to God. Our bodily experience matters. This is, one of my least favorite expressions is that we're uh, spiritual beings having a human experience. I don't know. We're humans who are spiritual creatures who have bodily experiences in a world that has spiritual meaning. And, you know,
Harder to fit on a bumper sticker, but it
exactly.
definitely is very
Yeah.
powerful. Well, Seth, I appreciate your the conversation here around spiritual formation, and I'm even here starting to hear traces of church or Christian community as like an integration station. People are
Mm,
having these experiences outside of an organized context, either sacred in their own sense or recreational, recreational, and having powerful encounters, divine beings, these ethical issues. I think some of the visionary content that Jaime was sharing, and even you, Seth, with these challenges. How can religious institutions begin to open themselves up as ways in which these experiences and encounters can be more deeply grounded within the traditions? And that means leadership being open, but also having the tools. It's not only about
right.
openness to have to see knowledge that they don't yet see, as you put it. I want to
Hmm.
transition because there are so many amazing questions that are now populating the chat, and I just want to pull out a couple, and also just being mindful of time because we have so much good stuff grist for the mill. There was one question that came through that asked, how might you imagine an optimum setting for psychedelic journeys in the mode of your own tradition? So going back to the set and setting, and how might that differ from the conventional medical research or psychedelic assisted therapy setting? Jaime, we'll start with you if you have some ideas here.
Sure. And also, I think, I don't know if we mentioned that our colleague Sugra, our dear friend, beloved Sugra, also has started an organization like Zach has for Muslims called Ruhani. I don't know if we said that.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Um, yeah, yes, for me, the difference in the settings has to do with just from a Christian standpoint. So the medical one, I think we all know that, I don't know if you do know, if people know, but you're lying on a couch with a blindfold and a headset, music, two guides sitting with you for 8 hours, you know, and yeah, a wonderful experience of its own, but very different, I think, from if you're talking about a religious setting where you would most likely you could do it individually or in a community. So take something like Holy Week, right, where you take something that's already naturally in the Christian calendar and already has liturgy around it, scripture, hymns, like regular things that Christians do when they gather together, kinds of rituals. Um, and build a container like that. I think typically people build an altar with Christian crosses, meaningful Christian symbols, and a shared altar space. So this is not something I see like, oh, Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, let's pass out psilocybin. But that's the kind of difference I'm seeing. So I've obviously been in the medical model of it, and that's part of the difference is just how the space is set up and the fact that it's a shared set of values and traditions and symbolism that lend a certain kind of intentionality, and the intention there, of course, is also a spiritual one.
Yeah, I don't think I would add too much to what Jaime said there. I think the optimum setting for a journey in the mode of my tradition, I guess I would say I would reverse the question. I would say why why not have church be the optimum setting whether psychedelics are involved or not? We don't have we because I think making churches, making synagogues, temples, whatever spaces where extraordinary spiritual experiences are uh, accessible, available, or within reach seems, you know, like the best of all possible situations. So you don't have to create a space for a new psychedelic experience, and instead it's the space that's already available to happen. And I guess, does that make sense? So we're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, Seth, do you see it at all like a so I guess I'm picturing like in Christianity, a lot of times we have these chrysalis or emmaus, these special, in other words, people physically go away to a
Mhm.
space outside of the regular
Yeah.
world. And often in my own conversion story, in fact, is that kind of story. In scripture, somebody asked about induction techniques. If I quickly speak to that. So Jesus, you look at Jesus in the wilderness, he intentionally goes away
Right.
out into a desert, like a very physically demanding, austere place. He's fasting, he's praying. All of these are induction techniques that we see in scripture. We see the same thing, the transfiguration. They go up to a mountain. You see Peter on the roof in Acts. Again, he's praying, he's fasting. So either you see people in, doing something like ecstatic dance, like actively, or ascetic practices. So you can either add something in or take something away, but you're doing something abnormal. And so I love what you said, Seth.
Hmm.
And when I said that, I was thinking more, so I was away. And again, I had a conversion experience there. And I get the same question. I see there's a question from a viewer there about how do you know these things are real, right? How do you know? Because even
Right.
Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, Paul says.
Yeah.
This is where community comes in. But, when people ask that question, it's a great question. I love the question. I appreciate it. And I think about my own conversion. I'm Baptist, and Baptists love a great conversion story. We can say January 18th, 1986. We can often tell you the date,
Yeah.
etc. And I never find anybody suspicious of whether the experience was real, insofar as on the basis of that experience, I created my whole life. I mean,
Hmm.
up in
Right.
church. I'm now an ordained Bible professor. So the question,
Mhm.
and the same thing happened with my Johns Hopkins experience. So I had the experience, and now it has directly affected what I do with my time, my energy, etc. So anyway, that's
Yep.
answering questions I saw in the chat. So I love what you're saying about the church setting. I think it can maybe both and. Yeah.
Yep. And there's another thing I want to highlight too, what you were saying, Jamie, just real quick, Zach, if you don't mind. The going away aspect, I this is important to me. I recognize that it's a rapidly changing situation and world, but I just think it's really important to understand that traditionally the use of psychedelics was primarily limited to the shaman of a village, one person who goes out for the sake of the village and brings back information for the people. Most people actually aren't that driven to blast themselves out of shared reality into some alternate space to see what's out there. And and so for a long time, these kinds of experiences were given over to the shaman of the village, the mystic and that sort of thing. And then they would bring information back to the people, and the people would take it in and do what they wish with it. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, psychedelic experiences in churches and that sort of thing, I just think it's really important that we understand not everybody wants to do this, and nor should they be made to think they're missing something by not doing it. Those of us who have gone there are now sort of called or tasked with bringing useful information back from what we've seen. And so I just wanted to add that aspect to it.
Yeah, I appreciate here kind of like a polarity of two models, and please God, many more. Creating a Christian influenced psychedelic space for spiritual work or spiritual formation that's not necessarily inside the church, but that is gesturing toward sacred Christian space. And on the other hand, what I'm hearing from Seth is making these established spaces that we already have without having to go into retreat, having to run into the desert, but to make them more conducive toward direct experience, Seth would say extraordinary experience, and kind of seeing how these things are maybe starting to connect with each other. That we're wanting our religious traditions to be more open to psychedelic, extraordinary, ecstatic experiences, if you will, and how we also then make those experiences beyond institutions feel more fed and nourished by our own traditions and our own rituals. So there is absolutely a both and here. I think in my own tradition, somebody asked me to talk. Okay. Um, I think we see this, if it's a binary, in some of the traditional spaces for religious exploration. The main one being the Beit Knesset, the synagogue, where organized prayer happens, where there is some sort of decorum about the order of things, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to a service. And ideally, in that space, there are encounters with the sacred. There's the emotive, and there's the rational, there's the intellectual, there's the somatic that's happening. I don't know how many synagogues where that's happening today, and at least in North America. If you could put them in the chat, I'd be happy to hear because I need to go to them. But then another model of spiritual exploration is the Beit Midrash, is the house of study and learning, where there are far fewer rules of engagement. The text is the main locus between two learning partners or more, where people are finding truth, people are finding God, people are finding connection in the give and the take of the text. Um, and I could potentially imagine a third space emerging, at least for Jews and maybe for Christians as well, where there is something that is beyond text, that is beyond the liturgy, the prayer book, but something kind of more direct and internal that is being explored. So, kind of borrowing from Jaime's model of a Christian influence space, looking at Seth's model of whatever we're doing, we're making room for extraordinary experiences, this kind of five, the third testament. Oh boy, here we go. Um, but these five aspects of the framework that you shared, but having it again be another adjunct, and I would say, Seth, you joke about a third testament, but there needing to be another turning of the moment that we are in, then another turning of our spiritual tradition to be holding much more than what we can contain now, because there are many multitudes, there are many mansions yet to be explored. Okay, so back to another question that we have. Did you experience this for both of you? Did you experience any changes in your sense of morality or ethical beliefs during or after the experience? Jaime, you spoke about, and I've heard you speak about this, and I'm so glad that you brought it back in, about like the jewel that may or may not have belonged. I mean, this is really big work here. And maybe from that experience and where you are in that integration, if you don't mind disclosing maybe just a little bit more of your integration process, but maybe zooming out more broadly as well, of how these experiences have or haven't really impacted your ethical and moral frameworks.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And Seth, do you want to go first? So I'm not, I think I went first. That's, I don't want to.
Oh,
We're all talking
I,
a lot. It's great.
yeah, I mean, sure, I can speak to it sort of quickly. I just in terms of my personal experience, I wouldn't necessarily say on its fundamentals, my ethical or my moral senses shifted. I would say that they became more compassionate and deepened. And by that, I mean, particularly after my second experience, I sort of had an awareness that um, our our human capacity to uh, control a lot of our drives, our needs, our wants, our ability to control those are very limited. And I'm not convinced that our as you know the letters in the New Testament or the Christian Testament, they make a lot about self-control. I have questions about how extensive our personal self-control actually is. This goes to free will questions as well. And morality and ethics in many ways require a deep sense of free will. And I, 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 I came away from my experiences actually having less of a sense of free will than more of a sense, and that there's very little in our personal control. And so, in that regard, I, I had more space for forgiveness, for latitude, and for understanding of breaches of my personal moral and ethical code. So I would say it didn't change my sense of ethics or morality, but uh, it did soften my application of it. So.
And I see that we're on time. I'm not trying to be evasive. So yeah, it is ongoing work. For me, what had to happen was, because I'm an academic, so I can do a lot of things up here. And I'm like, oh, I believe in forgiveness and I did all this kind of stuff. But actually then instituting regular practices, knowing what my tendency is and being honest about my tendency to understand, and then having dedicated, focused, intentional practices around whatever virtue it is that God is really calling me to work on in that moment. But again, the 9 that Paul lists: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. that's enough for a lifetime. And so no, nothing changed for me morally, ethically. I was Christian going in, Baptist going in, Baptist coming out. But in terms of instituting regular practices to not cheat on the head to toe embodiment of the virtues versus the just neck up commitment to the virtues,
Mm.
it's kind of a takeaway.
I think maybe I would just add, as now I guess I'm a panelist also, that I think this is ongoing, but it is very noticeable from my direct experience until now, um, that my ethical and moral commitments are also expanding beyond the human. That I am kind of greeting the earth more as a being that I am in partnership with. I'm relating to, maybe I'm disclosing too much. I'm relating to animals and plant life um, with some kind of sense of them being sacred siblings to me. And I feel that directly in my own scripture, yeah, our own scripture, thinking of myself as a created being that is created alongside other created beings from the same stuff, either from spirit or matter or both, and chaos, that we're really all in this together. And that we come from the same divine parent. And so how could I not act in line with preserving their life as much as they have preserved my life and every life that has ever existed up until this point? And I don't know if I would have had that feeling if I hadn't participated in the Hopkins study, but it's become part of my practice to honor that. And I wonder for how many more this kind of global consciousness and awareness of safety and protection. Um, I'd love to hear more, maybe just Seth, I'd like to hear from you. Given that you shared the destabilizing or extreme event that you had in your second experience, um, how might you just, in brief, share how might you approach responsibly handling spiritual crisis for others coming to you and your care following a psychedelic journey, given your own direct experience with this?
Yeah, I think part of the issue, it seems to me, with psychedelics is a bit of what I was saying before, that it moves the dial from knowing to known. And so that when we have these experiences, they seem, particularly when they're destabilizing or difficult, they seem absolutely personal and completely meant for you. And it's entirely possible, I think, given the sort of part of, you know, uh, part of the spiritual experience, it seems to me, is that it broadens our sense of community, of experience, in that it becomes very clear pretty quickly that experiences we have may not be for us, that they might be for someone else or for other people, that the meaning of them might be for others rather than for me. And I think that can be very true of a difficult experience, that the desire to take on the difficulties of that difficult psychedelic experience in particular as a personal thing that's destabilizing you. I mean, one of the directions I would definitely go is, well, how do you see that in others? How do you see it in the world? How do you see it manifesting itself entirely outside of your experience? And what is it about what's happening right now that you feel you've taken that on? Why now? And what is it about it that you're taking that on? And so, I think it's a peculiar aspect of psychedelics, but also extraordinary spiritual experiences, that they are so deeply personal, that it is the experience you had, And and is it though? I mean, and I begin to question the person question part. So part of the issue of depersonalizing and destabilizing is you've taken it so personally. And so trying to depersonalize the experience a little bit, unless the experience you've come from, because we know a few people who've had depersonalization experiences where everything just sort of fades away and you're no longer able to connect to the world. Now you have to take an opposite approach. How is this a personal experience for you? How is it, you know? And so it can go either direction, but I, and part of it is how do I want to say this without undercutting the entire spiritual endeavor at all, is uh I just think
Carefully.
psychedelics are functioning on the structure of the brain itself, and that's a structure we all share, and so it's part of what's happening is just functionally part of the structure of the brain, the human brain. And so, you know, and so I guess what I'm saying there is just, yeah, this is something that psychedelics can do. And you know, just backing people off of the personalization of the difficulty of it is my initial response here. There's other directions, obviously, and Jaime has way more training in this than I do.
But you're the pastor's pastor. I just love listening to Seth. I love you so much. I love your brain, and I also love your pastoral sensibility, because that's the way you do it. And part of what I hear, because I know you, Seth, is you literally tune into what is this person's, like, exploring, instead of coming with a one size fits all, like, oh, when people have X experience, here's the solution. But instead, journeying with somebody, like, what happened? What does that mean for you? Where was God in that? Where was God absent in that? Yeah, I love it. It's just, yeah. Anyway, I have nothing to add.
Yeah, no, at all. But it does sound like, I mean, from Seth's comments, that religious professionals probably need to sharpen up their background in depth psychology as much as possible, and also just other um, psychotherapeutic interventions, that we begin to understand more. What I hear you saying a little bit, Seth, is getting more comfortable with ideas about like the collective unconscious from Jung in a supportive setting, starting to understand more about archetypal work. And how that, is this part of a person's direct experience, or is there something broader happening that a person doesn't have to take responsibility for? It's also reminds me of something that Joshua Schrei from the Emerald podcast shared about how in some indigenous communities, when people do have extraordinary experiences, whether they're with plant medicines or not, uh, the uh, sometimes the need or the tradition to have a personal experience be woven into a collective myth. That it's not only for them, right? That's actually potentially creating ego inflation, a messianic complex. This was for me, and maybe kind of the more elder sense of saying, no, this is for us. This is about all of us. And so, taking personal autonomy and communal authority into some kind of balancing act. And so, if we're starting to play with these materials, even in a good way, being able to be deep students of how other traditions and other lineages have held this, and started for maybe thousands of years to work on this balancing act. So that maybe gets into the last question here, or at least one of our last questions. We'll start with you, Jaime. Um, how do we begin to encourage or support universities, religious grad programs, training programs like seminaries, chaplaincy, to include psychedelic work as part of their curricula, to create, produce, and support better faith leaders as we move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'd love to hear it from the Jewish perspective as well. Uh, for in terms of seminaries. So yeah, it's a great question, and exactly part of it has to do with informing more people, inviting more people into this conversation, and helping people understand this is not a fringe conversation. This is mainstream, and it's our responsibility as a seminary to train people, because this is a thing, and more and more people are going to have even psychedelic assisted therapy. So whether you like it or not, even that is a thing. So getting more people into this conversation the way you're having this, even Zach, just getting it on the radar screen so that more people can then advocate within their own context about the need to make this a serious subject, as intellectual academic enterprise in the larger university, human culture, human knowledge, et cetera, but then specifically in programs, as you said, and it's being done. Jeffrey Reddy in Toronto has a really great class. There are some classes already going on. So I would also say collaboration is everything. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. You do have colleagues for sure, whatever your interest or your calling is. There are colleagues also interested in it. They may have already put together a syllabus. They may have already, worked in their own university to get this accepted. Again, there's groups like Psychedelic Chaplaincy Network, where again, there's a collaboration. I think when you have groups of people coming together with multiple perspectives and putting something together to say, here, we as a group with all of these different credentials and perspectives are asking you to think about this, I think it's far more effective than an individual going in a university or seminary setting. So I think the more we can collaborate, especially across disciplines, the more effective we can be in kind of getting this thing just to be more central than it is. You're muted, Zach.
I'll at least have one for every webinar. Seth, any sense of thing to Jaime's extensive list of recommendations from your perspective?
So, yeah. So what was your question again?
Yeah, the question was when we're starting to think about how we support seminaries,
Mm,
advanced graduate programs, universities in order to have psychedelics be part of the curriculum, the training of these individuals in leadership positions, just like we have been, but kind of like after the fact. Right? We're trying to move the needle so that people are not encountering these things only in a research environment, but saying, here is information that you need. Here's the kind of specialty training that you need so that you can go out and support your communities, support
mhm.
individuals who are working with psychedelics. What is some of the encouragement that you could give to support these institutions in bringing this into their curriculum?
I'll give that over to Jaime. She's
Oh, she already did. That's good. Great.
And there's also there,
Uh,
by the way, in case people don't know, there's a thing also called Psychedelic Educators Network. If you're not part of that, that's for university. That's not confessional or religious. So there are organizations out there just to make people aware. Can I also just jump in? I don't know, not to be self-promoting, but in terms of like creating resources, I have a website. It's just my name, Jaime
yeah.
Clark-Soles. And there's a section under there just on psychedelics as well. And I try to keep it as up to date to try to have links and make things as easy as possible for people to access things without digging.
Mm.
And there's an essay on
Yeah.
there free called Psychedelics, the Bible, and the Divine, in case you're interested in kind of a deeper thing of like mixing the Bible with the medical therapeutic. I would throw those out as a couple places to start, more intellectually or academic.
We'll definitely be sharing your information and how people can reach out to you and get to know more of your work. I would also just include here, because as we have all mentioned in some way or the other, the real impact and the need for bringing in the body, right? This isn't just intellectual work, but the soul resides within the soma. to become more aware of advanced practices in somatic sensing, somatic experiencing, because if we are only relating to it up here, right, as my bookshelf might indicate, I think we're also still kind of recreating a wheel that we might not want to be on anymore, which is interfacing with divinity from the neck up. And so how do we bring the body into these experiences? I think we've covered a lot, and without Sugar here, even we've had a rich conversation, but we miss our dear sibling and continuing to think about her. And I think that we will also um, gift our listeners some more time. First of all, I just want to thank again Jaime and Seth for showing up for themselves, for their experiences, for their ongoing integration. I feel like I'm still integrating my experiences at Johns Hopkins, and for all of you, the people who came to sit and to learn, to listen, to hear, to feel, and everyone else who will be tuning in on the recording as well. Thank you so much for participating in the way that you were able to. I want to thank again Chloe Jacobs, our program manager, for putting all of this together and having this feel very smooth. And again, I want to thank Ligare and Hunt Priest for being part of this and helping support this series, as well as Sugra's organization, Ruhani. And I want to thank everyone, but also invite you to come back. We're going to be having at least 2 more of these panels with more participants, more voices, more perspectives, and different moderators. So we hope to see you here. If you are interested, you can stay connected with Ligare. The link is in the chat. We're also going to be putting in Jaime's information and Seth's to continue to follow their work, which is unfolding. And we're so grateful that there are people who care about this topic. We hold psychedelic work in these religious traditions, and really how we're supporting an individual flourishing through safety, harm reduction, advanced knowledge of scientific research, and to be supporting all those who are doing this work sincerely.